welcome to this Asian Confluence conversation titled Balancing Ecology and Economy. This program is being held in collaboration with the Hans Seidel Foundation, New Delhi, as part of a series on a project that the Asian Confluence and the Hans Seidel Foundation are together doing on a project on water federalism, what we call Water Federalism 2.0 in India. It consists of a publication of a book and a series of 3 webinars, this being the first of the series. Today's conversation is on this very, very important and timely topic of balancing ecology and economy at a time when humanity has undergone a pandemic uh, uh, and we are under great introspection, and there is a great impetus and urge for economic recovery and economic growth, and at the same time the issues of sustainable development, balancing, taking care of nature, these are issues that have come to the forefront in everybody's mind. And today's conversation, we are very, very honored and pleased to have two of India's most foremost experts from the field of economics, ecological economics. I'm pleased to introduce Professor Aparna Soni, professor at the Center for International Trade and Development, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Welcome, Dr. Soni.
Thank you.
A word of introduction. Dr. Soni's research areas include international trade, renewable energy, sustainable development, and environmental goods and services. She served as the chairperson of the center during December 2015 to January 2018. Prior to joining JNU, she was the faculty at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. She has also served as a member of the Advisory Committee on Trade and Environmental Issues in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, as an external expert in the Consultative Committee on Trade and Environment, Ministry of Environment and Forest, and a consultant to the World Bank, UNCTAD, ICTSD, ICRIER, and TERI. She is also the Vice President of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics. A warm welcome to you. Today,
Thank you so much.
we have Dr. Nandan Non in conversation with Dr. Aparna Soni. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Non, who is an economist by disciplinary training with a doctoral degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He teaches the interface of environment, development, and economics. His present research interests are in ecological economics, environment and development, and environmental economic accounting. He was the head of the Department of the Policy Studies of TERI SAS and secretary of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics. He has been a recipient of the doctoral fellowships from University Grants Commission, Indian Council for Social Science Research, and a Fulbright Nehru International Educational Administrative Seminar Scholarship. He has published widely, a guest co-editor of the Review of Environment and Development in Economic and Political Weekly, and coordinator of Internal Quality Cell, TERI SAS. I am also very, very pleased to welcome Mr. Volker Lennart Plan, the country representative of the Hans Seidel Stiftung. He joins us from New Delhi. A very warm welcome to you, Volker. Um, uh, the Hans Seidel Foundation and the Asian Conference together have been working on these issues, and I'm very pleased to have you joining us as part of this discussion. Um, may I now request Volker to say a few words of welcome, and then maybe I will pass it on to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Sabia. Hans Seidel Foundation is very happy to collaborate with Asian Conference on this very important rows of events. And today's topic, as you mentioned, is extremely important and timely. Usually, ecology and economy, traditionally they are in conflict with each other, but one normally takes precedence. And I think it's quite clear that in India, that has aspired to become a $5 trillion economy by 2024, it is usually economy that takes precedence over ecology. But in fact, they can promote each other, which has also been shown in various countries, especially in the European Union, where ecology and economy try to become harmonized by governance. As I mentioned, India has become very ambitious, but also in terms of ecology. Renewable energies now make up already more than 100 gigawatts of the total energy production. There are numerous strategies for e-mobility, clean air. We have the National Mission for Clean Ganga. But at the same time, in India, deforestation continues. Plastic waste continues, despite regulations being in place. We have rampant water and air pollution. We have a shrinking biodiversity. And even the Ganga cleanup has not fulfilled its own promises, as the National Green Tribunal has made public recently. Most of this is because of economic expansion, or let's say expansion of economic activity. But it's actually not a question whether ecology is being only supported. It can facilitate economic development. But we have, besides economic development and cause of ecologic destruction by humans, there's also climate change. Climate change damages like floods and droughts wreak havoc on the state budgets. So in turn, they have economic repercussions. And the healthcare system in India is burdened with the treatment of and deaths by patients with diseases created by pollution, especially lung diseases. So all these they create costs on the productivity and on the economy. So we see that these areas of research that our distinguished guests today are pursuing and are teaching also is extremely important and will also play an important role in the future. And I presume also on governance. I'm looking forward to learning from you what can be done to find the balance, what governance structures need to be in place, if a paradigm shift has to occur, and exactly how we can be optimistic that a balance like this can be found. So with these very little words, I would like to give back to Sabia to kick off our event.
Thank you. Thank you, Volker, and thank you for those words. And maybe I would now pose a question which is primary in our mind as this broadcast is going to a very wide audience, a technical as well as a non-technical, academic and a non-academic audience. And I think there is a question that I think we all have in our mind and want to understand, and that is, what is really sustainable development? What does it entail? How do you really balance ecology and economy? Is sustainable development and balancing ecology and economy the same? Um, can you give us a bit of a theoretical background and a fundamentals, because both of you are teachers, and then we, please take it forward after that. Thank you very much. Over to you, both of you.
Okay. I'm having a little difficulty with my connection. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are fine.
Please proceed.
Okay. So before I actually take on the question of what we mean by sustainable development, I think I would like to do is typically what I share with my class before we get into that, and that is a matrix that we have used for a very long time, thanks to Herman Daly. It was an article he published in 1968, which essentially says, where do we place our economic system? Because we are just one species in the biotic population of the ecological system. So if we were to take out the humans and then consider all other sectors as non-human, so we have the economic system, which is agriculture, industry, households, you can add a few more. We have transaction amongst ourselves. That is essentially the economic system. However, there is also transaction across between the human economic sectors and the non-human biotic and abiotic resources. So those transactions, you can think in three terms. There is one which is what we are, let's say, giving to the biotic and abiotic world, and what we are taking, that's the second one. And then the third one, which we often tend to ignore, is the transaction which is taking place amongst the biotic and the abiotic sectors, where the humans do get impacted, but we often tend to ignore it. So while we focus a lot on the transactions within the economic system across the agricultural industry, services, household, and so on and so forth, we tend to ignore the last one, which is across the non-human population. As far as the direct interface between the humans and the non-human world is concerned, one part is where we are using the environment, we are extracting natural resources, using it as input for in our production or services that we are rendering, or which we are also directly consuming, like air and water. There are other things also that we directly consume. So that would be in terms of the input use and consumption good. The other part is where we are using the ecosystem as our receptacle of waste. So whatever is the end part, which has no economic value to us, we are essentially dumping it. So it's providing the services of waste degeneration, but there is a limit that the ecosystem. So it has a buffering capacity or an assimilative. That is what we need to remember. So when we are thinking in terms of balance, one has to think that it is not that where does the ecological system fit into our needs. It should be the other way. We should be actually fitting in to that ecological system. And that sometimes we tend to forget when we get too engrossed in thinking about economic transactions. So I think this is something that is very important to keep in mind before we plunge into the details of managing any one particular environmental resource like water, let's say. Because we cannot compartmentalize this one natural resource. It is part of a whole. Because recall the biotic and the abiotic system, they are actually together. So if we think in terms of what are the water resources, the quantum of water, the quality of water that we have, that gets impacted by other environmental aspects. So if we think of the water cycle or the amount of precipitation, that is directly related also to the vegetation that we have, right? So you're using the atmosphere in the water cycle. So all of these aspects need to be kept in mind. So before economics comes in, or ecological economics comes in, the natural science, the meteorological science, the hydrological science, that plays an immensely big role. So for example, more than 25 years ago, when I first started working in the field, it was on air pollution and impact of air pollution on a particular commodity. But it started off by looking at the meteorological map of, and it happened to be North America. But when I'm tracking the, let's say, the precipitation, the acid precipitation, before I get into the point sources and where it is deposited, the pattern of the wind, the timing, and so on and so forth, all of that mattered before I could actually come up with what is, we would say, optimal tax that you would put to correct in your economic system. So you cannot actually disaggregate. So you begin with the ecological system. Having said that, I think we can talk about the working definition of sustainable development. Again, economics being a social science, very human centric, it says we want to maximize our welfare, and we are not myopic. So we think in terms of maximizing welfare such that over time we do not take away the ability of the following generation to be as well off as us, at least as well off. So it is like a forward looking behavior. But to be at a particular level of well being, what do we need? We need capital to work on. Because after all, we will have the flow of goods and services from those capital. So there are different types of capital assets. One which is considered to be the natural capital, next manufactured capital. So the infrastructure that we build, the buildings, the bridges, the dams, so on and so forth. Then we have the human capital, which has the ability to come up with newer ways of doing things, increasing resource efficiency, getting more with less. And close enough to that human capital is also the health capital. Because if you're not well enough, you will not be able to innovate and perform. And of course, you also have the institutional asset. That is, what have you built? And this institutional asset becomes also important because as we grow, and often growth is associated with greater urbanization, our social fabric changes. As our social fabric changes, our customs, the way we were otherwise conserving certain natural resources, that also changes, which often we have this concept of traditional, informal way of conserving the resource. And of course, that gets kind of wiped out as we are growing and changing. Entire structure is changing. However, economics tends to be very, very optimistic, saying that since we are looking at this, the portfolio of assets, where natural resource or natural capital is one such asset, it is almost as if I can substitute one form with the other. So I run down natural capital and I'm increasing manufactured capital. However, when we do that, we have to remember that there are certain functions that the economic system that can perform and cannot perform. So the ecological services, which are, let's say, the water cycle, right? Purification at the level of, controlling the moisture of the soil, the species of forests, trees that we have, which have inherent properties. So just when we kind of annihilate all of that, bring in the physical capital, and then have some reforest, it is not going to perform exactly the same purpose, right? So the substitutability has limitation. And that is also something that we need to remember. At this stage, I think I will ask Nandan to kind of share his thoughts on sustainable development.
Okay, thanks, Aparna. Thank you to both Vokar and Sabyasachi for inviting us to share our own thoughts. Just to take what Aparna said a little forward is that economics as a discipline, if you look at it, it has undergone substantial changes in the past in recognizing the importance of ecosystem services and natural capital. So I recollect in my younger days reading the production function as having only capital labor as the two inputs. But over the years, though the textbook may not have reflected, but over the years, R, another input, which stands for resource, have been included in it. So the now it reads as L, K, and R. Not only that, economics as a discipline has moved ahead and also understood the difference between certain assets which are durable of kind and ecological ecosystem assets which are durable in nature, and some other which are of the time kind of a fund flow. So we get oxygen as well as timber, and there are different kinds of properties that you have. So rate of oxygen you cannot change given from a given forest, but the timber you can cut down. So to extend what Aparna said, that economic science had actually progressed much further, and to identify or to categorize different kinds of natural capital in terms of what kind of services it provides. So the literature on payments for ecosystem services, or for that matter, ecosystem markets for ecosystem services, is fairly developed. There are challenges, but at the same point of time, the economic system has understood and recognized the importance of it. One can always look at it that yes, the ecological limits which Aparna mentioned was not something which was visible so much maybe 200 years ago, and now they are on your face. So economic discipline is undergoing changes, and this is something that is most important to note. If you look at the notions of sustainable development, there are two primary ways of interpretation. One is that a given level of well-being, and that is to be sustained. That is one way of interpretation. And this has hardly this may not or may not have anything as such insofar as the ecological questions are concerned. And that is another way of looking at it, that develop with respect to the source and the sink functions that Aparna mentioned, with respect to the ecosystem from which the economic system is drawing everything. Now, it is of course interesting to note that the term sustainable development goals, or the things that are included in the bouquet of sustainable development goals, they are not only environmental or ecological. So we are looking at the question of sustainable development goals not just in recognition of the ecological systems, but at the same point of time, many other things. The most important point is that the limits to growth, which 1972, this Club of Rome has talked about, and which was criticized at that point in time, which is now become part and parcel of the economics disciplines understanding. This is a constraint. Against this constraint, we have to optimize, and whatever we may do. I think this is what has happened in the last 48 years, I would say, that this recognition of the ecological limits, and also looking at the economic system or the growth of the economic system in consideration with that. So year after year, or at least I know that World Economic Forum, when the survey is conducted among the world leaders of economics, among the 5 top risks, they include one is climate, other is water. So this is very much part of not just economists, but also in the operational level. It is reflected within the big economist leaders. And we will come back to that, how even at the United Nations level, this recognition of the ecological and economic systems intertwinings and exchanges have been formalized. We will come back to that a little later maybe. Over to you, Aparna.
Okay, my connection is playing games here. I'm hearing too much of my own echo. All right. So thanks for bringing in the Club of Rome and the 70s era, and also what we are always fed in terms of our standard first principles economics. And it's unjust on our parts that we don't introduce some of these themes which are more than a century old. That is the distinction between renewable versus non-renewable resources, and what is the right way to extract the resources for consumption or production, for that matter. And in fact, the founding work of environmental economics goes back to first the ecological laws, and then says where it stops, we take on from there in terms of coming up with policies for resource management or pollution management. 1972 was, in that sense, a very critical year. The United Nations multilateral meeting that was called, where, of course, the Prime Minister of India had spoken. And it is good to note that in 1974, India had its first major pollution act, which is the Water Act, Water Pollution Prevention Act, followed by 1977, which is the Water Cess Act, which unfortunately has been repealed in January 2018. Then we had the Air Act in 1981, and so on and so forth, and the Umbrella Act, the Environmental Protection Act in 1986. All of these acts have been revised as need arose. So, in terms of laying down the foundation for environmental legislation and regulations that would be coming through, it actually started in the 70s. But as we have noted in the 90s also, when we were writing, that the major problem is not so much that we don't have the legislation. The problem is that of implementation, enforcement. Of course, one can still get into the argument as to whether the standards which are set are good enough or not. But more problematic is the fact that it is not implemented properly. So before we get into specific regulations, there are, very broadly, one say that there are three types of regulations that one can think of. One is, of course, what is called command and control regime, where you set standards and norms. Say, you cannot have more than this level of BOD or COD in the water. Because, and where does that level come from? And BOD, COD meaning biological oxygen demand or chemical oxygen depending on the BOD, of course, is related to the bio waste which is in there, which can be disintegrated with oxygen by the bacteria. So that higher the level of BOD, that means more organic waste is dissolved in the water, which of course can be because you have untreated sewage going into the rivers. So command and control measures are setting the standards. The other type of measures that you have are what called economic or market based, where you actually have taxes or fees that you impose on polluters, point polluters or mobile polluters, essentially to ensure that the polluter is paying for the cost it is imposing on others. And what is this cost, and why do we even get in? It is because the environment actually falls into what would be the class of public goods, where actions which are very private in nature, which are taken for private benefit, and one incurs only private costs for taking that act, but the cost can be imposed and it is shared across many. So the problem is that the benefit is private, but the cost is dispersed. And the cost is dispersed not only in terms of human population, but it can also be for that biotic and abiotic resources that we have. So economics has a very clean principle. It says your actions should be only up till the point that at the margin, you're not looking only at your private benefit and your private cost, but you're looking at your social cost and your social benefit. And social doesn't mean just including the four of us. It means that you're also including the whole range of biotic population. And that is essentially the valuation that we often don't do. Okay, so far I've actually spoken about two, that is command and control, economic instruments. There is also another way, which is like called the property rights approach, thanks to Coase in 1961, who said that even if you have an environmental and it is mediated through a particular resource, environmental resource, what you need to do is have well-defined property rights, because we are essentially talking about problems being mediated through common property resource. So if you actually have well-defined property rights, then you would expect economic agents to be, following their maximization rule of at least ensuring that the cost and the benefits are equalized at the margin. So the problem that you have of making others share the cost would be going away. What we do have in India is the command and control rule. But even that is incomplete, at least as far as some of the specific water pollution control is concerned. We don't have the property rights being well defined in terms of water usage. What has been inherited with a very old kind of a regulation allows for over extraction of water. And of course, there are also conflicts in the drawing rights. The other part is, of course, what one can think of as moral suasion instruments, where the government may have failed in its regulatory regime, and then the public takes it upon them. Let's say an individual citizen takes an industry to court saying that you are violating an established environmental norm, or saying something that doesn't exist but should be there. Because by our constitutional law, we are allowed to protect the environment. Every individual has the right to protect the environment. I think it's 51A. There is, of course, the right to life. Nandan, you want to take in? I'm taking too much time.
Yes, no, that's absolutely fine. So, in fact, while I was listening to you, I was just looking at that. What are the areas of environment or natural resource where we have the command and control type of instruments? Just look at, so these are mostly pollution. So either air pollution or water pollution. If you look at things like, say, mineral sector, or for that matter, forest, which is a natural resource based one. So there you have a certain kind of compensatory mechanism, where if you use the particular mineral, you have to pay certain things as a compensation to the people who will be affected by such extraction, and that is how the district mineral fund came up. And you have for the forest, you have this Forest Conservation Act section 3, because of which you have to pay certain net present value. Now, economically, if you look at it, these are economically maybe sound instruments to pursue economically. But if you look at the way implementation has happened, even if economically sound instrument, every month different news reports carry that so many thousands of crores are being left. In other words, it's not that the companies have not paid against that, whatever that compensation is, but the actual compensation that was to happen, be it new forest, be it, that is, ecologists look at this new forest as a wrong thing because it cannot replace an old forest. But even if with all these limitations, even if we have all these limitations, but then also we are not having such things. In other words, money is being collected. One cannot say that money is not being collected. Industry knows that it has to pay for the cost that it is taking, it is imposing on the society. It is being collected, but at the end of the day, something is happening as a result of which that compensation is not being materialized. So these are the cases of worries, is that even if we look at the way economists would try to design an instrument, and if you have it even there, you don't have such a situation where the operationalization takes place. One example of what the economist may have designed and maybe working somewhat is the clean development mechanism, which deals with the carbon trading. And that's one area where economics has been operationalized correctly, and that is that the least cost solution to carbon sequestration or carbon absorption, this has happened. And what Aparna mentioned is that the Coase theorem, that you can actually see that Coase theorem in operation in the CDM. CDM has problems. I'm not denying that CDM doesn't have problem. CDM may actually institute, or may result into a kind of ecosystem services which may not be in line with the needs of the local population. So there are problems, but all I'm trying to say is that yes, economists have intervened in the policy instrument regime vis-a-vis ecological systems. They have been successful in some, they may not have been successful in other. But I think we need to move to certain other regulatory frameworks in India, in particular related to water. Aparna, if you can share some of your thoughts on that, I think it is time that we go there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. So I had already mentioned the Environmental Pollution Acts, the Water Act, 1974, followed by the Water Cess. One way of looking at these two, the first one is, of course, addressing the part where you're using the water bodies, typically the fresh water bodies, in terms of dumping the waste. And essentially, it's saying that based on the system, how much should you be doing? The only thing is that it was given in terms concentration, the standards which are actually defined by plant, by industry, but they're given in constant. So what happens is, if it is effluent coming out of the industry, which is diluted, it may satisfy the concentration limit, but the pollution load increases. And that in itself then damages the riverine system. It is not able to cope. So there is a threshold level beyond which it cannot take it anymore. And if we don't respect that, we have a river. So one is, of course, the fact that the kind of standards that you come up with. Next is whether you're actually implementing those. The other law that I refer to, the Water Cess Act, the criticism for that earlier that we used to have, that it is a very low fee for the industries to be paying for water use. I mean, for that matter, even for domestic use also, it's low. But again, there are equity issues in the use of water, because after all, air and water form part of a subsistence level of consumption bundle, without which we cannot survive. So, are you able to hear me?
With breaks in between, that's okay. So if I may say a few things here. So what Aparna mentioned is yeah, please go ahead.
One point. When the implementation aspect is concerned, let's say for the pollution, the local level, because water is a state subject. The center does have a say in terms of setting standards at a very broad level, at the national level. And also, let's say, when it is to do with the riverine system, which is cross states. So there is where the state comes in, the center comes in. Otherwise, it is all locally managed. And at the local level, let's say the pollution control boards were in charge of implementing the standards. They were using the water cess revenue as a funding source. Unfortunately, now the entire Water Cess Act has been repealed. The water cess has been subsumed in GST. So you have actually reduced the funding capacity of anyway, which is a poor kind of regulatory body. So you have actually made it even weaker. It has also subsumed the coal cess, which was going into the National Clean Energy Fund for development of renewable energy. It was also being used for a river cleaning system like the Ganga cleaning system. That has also been subsumed in the GST. So you've actually made a weak regulatory body at the local level even weaker. I think that in itself is not a very good position to be in. And going forward, if we are trying to increase our GDP to 3 trillion, there is a very palpable risk that we are ignoring the environmental truths that we have, including, of course, the fact that we have also made it easier for industry in terms of diluting the environmental impact assessments. So it's like a double whammy. I think I'll ask Nandan to bring in the property rights issues for water.
Before getting into the property rights issues, I think the question that Aparna is raising is that it's what economists call it is a stock flow problem. So the laws, like water laws, they look at the way it is the flow problem. So the rate question it is. So per unit of say 100 milliliter of water, this may be the amount of pollution. But that's a non-zero number. So if you increase the flow, essentially the pollution is a stock. And we have all know it precisely because of the ozone layer depletion that every year that accumulates and nature takes years to reduce it. Unfortunately, laws do not look at that kind of the stock question, or for that matter, no policy instrument, usually policy instruments do not look into the stock aspect of the pollution. We always look at the flow aspect. So look at it that even if every car in Delhi is fitted with the best, say, Euro 9 standard, and you have every year, if you add 1 million cars, the pollution is not going to go away, and every car is contributing minimum amount. It may be the minimum amount, but that is a non-zero. So if you multiply a very large number with a non-zero number, it will be a substantial thing. And that is exactly what has happened in Delhi over the years. So the capacity of the ecosystem has continuously reduced in terms of urbanization, and the place where I am right now is Vasant Kunj. Near that, this was Delhi Ridge. The ambience mall has come up in an area which is an ecologically sensitive area, which was supposed to be capturing water, rainwater, and take care of the groundwater level. So these are the ways which I think are the certain fallouts or certain matters that policy domain is unable to recognize the stock aspect of the pollution. Now, I think we have barely 10 minutes or so. So I would rather go to the two other matters that we wanted to discuss, and that is to do with the prioritization matter, and the prioritization especially in the ecology economy interface with respect to water. And that on that matter of water, I have only one particular case in mind, and that is the river interlinking project. So let us look at this way. That is that, yes, water is a constraint, and it is recognized as a constraint, and therefore the proposal was that the water surplus areas from that water will be taken to the water deficit areas. Now, who has come out with this? It is the judiciary. In the first case, judiciary, it was mentioned in one of the cases, and judiciary has taken it up. And judiciary has come up with pronouncing a particular kind of judgment, which obviously prioritizes economic growth over anything else. So this was a policy space where neither the executive nor the legislature has anything to say, because river linking project is not something, it is any policy document, but judiciary came up with it, and the economy will be preferred over the needs of the ecosystem. If you talk to any hydrologists, and they're scandalized by the very fact that you can actually change the water landscape of the country. The reason being that the ecologists, and if you ask the natural scientists, they will say, they will harp on the importance of delineation of agroecological zones, agroclimatic zones, and so on and so forth. They will not talk about the way usually otherwise a policymaker will look at it, and that is the administrative zones. So in Punjab, for example, Punjab is not an area where one is supposed to be having water surplus crops, water intensive crops. If you look at water intensive, if you look at, in fact, there is a very recent paper, it is a very recent thesis by someone called Suparna Katyani. She has looked at that how the water, if you look at something called virtual water trade, that is the states which are producing water intensive crops, and it is going somewhere, and it is shown that the water deficit states are producing water intensive crops, and it is going to the water surplus states. And this is true for, if you look at world level information, it comes to some kind of that also. So I think the question that one is looking at is that, if you look at from the policy instruments to the planning matters, what shall be the basis on which one should plan it? Is it in recognition of the constraints, and that is in saying constraints are somewhat visible in the formation of agroecological zones or agroclimatic zones, what you can do and what you cannot do? But in reality, this is not something that happens. Aparna, over to you.
Yeah, since you brought up the issue of water deficient states, the question is, how do these farmers then get the water? They're extracting it from the ground. So what happens to the ground level? So the water level itself has been declined. And that, again, brings in very severe ecological issues. The other aspect is, how are they drawing it? Is there any limit to how much should be used? Just because you need it. And typically the history has been the large farmers could have deeper bore well, they would extract more water, use it in their fields, then the excess water that they were selling it to smaller farmers, either because they had fragmented land or because they couldn't afford to have bore well. So you had an informal water market. And that is not what Cose's theorem is at all. So we were mistaken if we say that, okay, everything is going to be fine. So there are no well-defined, and that problem is, it is because you allowed people to dig in as deep as they want, just because they own the piece of land. But that should have been only at the surface. And that's true even for the urban population. Now, of course, it has been illegalized. But until about 15 years, 20 years ago, people dug the wells. And who have the wells have extracted water like crazy. So the extraction that we are talking about, what is the right amount given the scarcity? It's a common pool resource. And they have been able to just access it. But you have actually impacted the entire region, right? Not just your own plot. So that is something dreadfully wrong. And these are issues that have been brought forward by experts who have looked at reforms that are required for India. But we need the political consensus to actually implement, first make these into policy and then implement them. I'd like to stop here because I know there might be questions, or Nandan might want to add something.
No, before, in fact, there are two questions that were there. Before we address the questions, I think we can look at some of the matters that we mentioned at the very beginning. Is that how the sustainability matters, or balancing the ecology and economy, the title of this today's conversation, how this is operationalized, how this is going to be operationalized. And I think for the audience, it will make sense to mention that in India, or for that matter, most of all countries, there is a system of national accounts by which the national income is calculated, and GDP is reported. For last 20 years, there has been efforts at the United Nations level to recognize the importance of this ecosystem economic system linkages, and therefore to value the natural capital, to recognize physical capital, physical domain or physical dimension of the natural capital, as well as to value it accordingly, because it is the understanding that the natural capital is getting depleted, and also the pollution is being increasing, precisely because it's a public or it's a free good. So it is important to recognize how much forest that we are depleting. Just like depreciation of the physical capital, we need to cut that down from our GDP calculation. So the ultimately in 2014, the system of environment in economic accounting has been approved by the United Nations Statistical Division. I must tell you that in 2020, we are in 2020, our or India's National Statistical Office have already chalked out a plan by 2025 for all natural resource sectors. The system of environmental SEA, it is called SEA accounting, will be in place. And I'm partly associated with this national mission that is soon to be launched, a national mission on biodiversity and human well-being. We will be working with the National Statistical Office in order to derive the methods towards recognition of these natural resources in the national income accounting. These are important steps because balancing of ecology and economy required that kind of recognition in the formal plane. Otherwise, it may go this way or that way. Aparnadi, if you want to respond to anything.
So in terms of the national accounting and the green accounting, again, it has been recognized in India, and the work has been continuing, and it is going to be continuing further, but it has to be integrated within what we call the economic system. There is a tendency in India to compartmentalize it. Like, okay, whatever the Ministry of Environment is doing, that's part of that. But let's do the serious business of the Ministry of Environment and Commerce. And over the years, we have had a tendency to integrate, but unfortunately often doesn't translate into action on the ground. And so in terms of rounding off, I would say, again, go back to what we began with, that natural science will play an incredibly important role in coming up with the right policies, but then implementing the policy and getting the political consensus to implement it wholeheartedly. That's what is important. And more so in water, because when it is now recognized, even Niti Aayog has been saying that, okay, we have a disaster coming pretty close to us. There is also need to kind of enhance information and awareness amongst people, because despite having what is considered to be information campaign to save water, people haven't changed their behavior. And we need deeper attempts to kind of change that amongst people. So I think I would stop here. Um, Questions that you might have? Sabya, have something on your mind?
Uh, I'm just showing up some questions which have come. There's a lot of questions related to uh, agriculture, and I think in the interest of time, maybe if I can request both of you to comment on uh, agriculture has been flagged, especially post pandemic, in this whole bid for economic recovery in the post COVID. Though we are not post COVID yet, but hopefully we will be. Uh, that agriculture has been a major area of focus for many governments, including many of the state governments have started drafting their newfound agricultural policies and water policies. Uh, and I would like to request you both to comment. There's also a new farm sector bill that has been passed, as you know. If you can comment on how where do you see the direction of sustainability even in agriculture moving forward, because again we are at a time when we have to show quick results because of the economic indicators, and at the same time reforms are due, and in both the water sector and the agriculture sector, which are intrinsically linked. Groundwater is a very important factor of that, as you very, very correctly pointed out. Um, so, can you comment on that?
Okay. I think agriculture will remain a very important sector because it's the largest employer in terms of a sector. Because unfortunately, our industry, nor the growth that we have, the services, the absorption of labor continues to be the highest in agriculture. And of course, with food security issue, yes, it is understood that agriculture is going to be one of the critical and focus areas, and we need to increase productivity. Having said that, water consumption across sectors, if you see, agriculture, industry, household, agriculture takes the bulk. Right? So again, going back to what I said earlier, it is not that we need to fit the ecological systems to our needs. We have to learn to fit ourselves in there. So if we say that going forward to hit the 3 trillion GDP, I have to increase my agricultural output by and for food security, and this is the water I need. No, it should be the other way. What is the water that I should be working with? And then fit my response to. And if I have not solved the problem of water extraction from the underground, so that is the groundwater harvesting that I'm now, which has anyway been flagged numerous times, how can we go ahead until we have actually had a reform in there? So I think at this stage, I will actually ask Nandan to
Yeah,
fill in.
so in fact, someone said, I think it was Jodhris and Amartya Sen at some point in time, that the Indian village is the Chicago economist's dream. That is, you don't have any regulation working there, so it is the market which is playing everything. So that's not quite correct, but feudalism is very much part and parcel of agriculture, Indian agricultural system. But if you look at it from the point of view of sustainability of an agricultural system, if you contrast it to to say any dimension of sustainability for, say, for example, industrial system. Till 1991, you have certain sector reserved for small scale industry. Why it was that? Because of certain concerns of equity, because of certain other concerns. So in case one particular agroecological zone cannot support water intensive crops, why allow such crops to there? In other words, if you are assuming a rational farmer, and the rational farmer is going to decide for the farmer's own sustainability, but the property rights regime doesn't allow the rational farmer to act rationally, simply because the property right regime is not a private property right, but it's a common, and that is a common in which every single input is rival in character. Then there is no way you can do anything if you leave everything as it is. In other words, sustainability of the farming system requires, rather than a reform, requires certain kind of regulation that I think is that in terms of, if you want to make it sustainable ecological terms, you need to specify this agroecological zone, this agroclimatic zone, these are the crops only can be produced, nothing other than that.
I think that is you define the
yes.
quantum of water you will be
yes.
allowing it to be used. Let's say in Punjab or Haryana. And that's the constraint you have to respect.
So on that note, I just have a very quick follow-up question. Don't you think that we need a new movement on changing our cropping patterns, changing the type of produce? For example, going into, say, millets, which are more dependent, more in line with the availability of the water in that particular area. If it's a saline area, it's one kind of millet. If it's a, do you see any sort of economic case being moved towards that regard, and how we can change our produce, the line of produce and the basket of produce for economic growth, but keeping the kitty of water that we have in mind? I mean, adjusting to the kitty of water that we have available. Is it even known? Is it even quantified?
Yeah, that's what the scientists and the hydrologists have to give us. That's not what the economist will give. The economist will work with it.
Okay. Yes. So that is where I think a lot more of intersection between balancing ecology and economy would come. More of discussions between economists and ecologists and hydrologists.
And going back to the question you had about what should be the right basket. Well, that is very simple in the sense that if you change the way people think, their preferences will change. Yes. Consumption baskets have changed over the years.
Yes.
Right. And advertisement itself changes behavior also. Information changes behavior. So it is not as if people are not going to change. That behavioral change will come with the information, with awareness. And that social change can come. But we have to really try to ensure that we are moving in that direction. And people will respond.
Absolutely. So more awareness is needed on these issues. And that's one of the purpose of such a conversation, actually, and this whole series. And Volker, would you like to say something? We are past our time, but it's okay, I think, to go a bit about 5 to 6 minutes more and round up.
That's extremely interesting, but there's no additional question from my side.
Would you like to make some closing remarks in that case?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Unless one of the speakers has another remark.
I have only one remark to make, and that is that there are some works that are going on in terms of making the consumer aware of the ecological cost of a product. It's like airline tickets comes with a carbon footprint. Like that, some of the companies are making some inroads into making the consumer aware of how much water footprint has been against this particular product. So in the urban areas, at least we have seen there is a change in consumption pattern. There is a demand for organic products, or for the matter, products which are produced in a fair trade kind of a thing. And in Delhi, in city of Delhi, I can see tremendous demand for such products. And you have in fact, during this pandemic period, they have because they were providing deliveries, so their demand has increased a lot. I think the one important way to inform the consumer about the cost of the different kinds of natural resources, including water, would be this kind of interventions. I forgot the name of the company in Bombay who has contacted me how it can be done, and they were, I think, by next year something like that is going to come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, these kind of initiatives are the ones that are required. I thank you for putting also this at the end to show us what we can do. And I'm sure that our audience has also taken notes. I hope that everybody has taken away something from this. I surely have taken away a lot. I find some things confirmed that I have heard in other places, and I have learned new things. I think this behavioral change is a step that needs to come from all sides. It was pointed out earlier that regulations are not in place everywhere yet, even though we might sometimes have the feeling. Um, and if regulations are in place, there's a lack of enforcement. Now, even if regulations are in place, what is necessary in India to stop compartmentalization, to make sure that there's more space for a consensus, more space for integration of existing laws, but also a space where all actors can come together in order to achieve a common understanding of the underlying challenges. We need time to let these changes become a proper paradigm shift, so that the understanding will not be there only on the top, aka the government, and not only on the bottom with the population, but that it will come together. Um, and this would then probably automatically reach to a balance where we make sure that our needs are not trumping other ecological aspects of our lives and of the nation we live in, but that we learn how to adapt and maybe look back a little on how it was possible already some decades back. In the end, reaching a balance between ecology and economy means increasing well-being. This is what I've also, especially personally, taken away, because well-being is often advertised as purely economic lifestyle, but in fact it is closely linked to the ecology. So I thank you very much, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Nan and Dr. Sane, and of course our host, Sabisa Chigata, our partner organization, Asian Confluence. It was a very insightful talk, and it was very great to have you interact with each other, and also even taking the time to answer some of the questions from outside. I hope to see all of you again as speakers or as participants, active or passive, on 28th of October, when the next installment of this series will take place on the same platform and the same link. Sabia?
Thank you, Volga. And a very, very big thank you to Professor Soni, Dr. Non. Thank you for your very, very valuable insights. And I think we have a lot of takeaways from this. And at the Asian Confluence, with collaborators such as the Hans Seidel Foundation, we have been trying to build up interdisciplinary kind of conversations on these themes. And hopefully we will have other opportunities where we can have hydrologists talking to economists and agriculturists to see
We will.
what is the way forward. But on that note, thank you again very much, and looking
Thank you.
forward. We have a whole host of compliments coming in from our audience, and uh, on that note, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to
Thank you.
engaging
Thank
further.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye. Bye bye.
Bye.